Explain those Badlands. That's a hell of a name.
Good evening and welcome to Spellbreakers on Badlands. I'm your host, Matthew Trump. We come to you live every Friday evening at 7 p.m. Mountain Time, which is 9 p.m. Eastern Time. And we go for usually an hour and a half. And then I tend to hop over to Only Lands afterwards, which I hope to do again tonight. And I hope maybe you'll join us over there too. But in the meantime, we have a show to do tonight. We're doing part two of at least a two-parter that we started last week, and it's a little so the opening feels very abrupt, as it does for a lot of our hosts here on Badlands this week. We have to change our opening. You may have seen the opening that I started out with here, which is that we have that very dramatic thunderclap that comes in, and then it shows all the hosts, and then it ends with President Trump saying, "The Badlands, tell me about those Badlands." And well, we have to redo it every once in a while, of course, because we have shows that come and go, and it tends to be a little bit out of date at any given time before it gets updated. But this week, we had a substantial change in the Badlands lineup. We lost a couple of our hosts who left the Badlands Network for various reasons that I actually don't completely know about. Some of you may know more about it than I do, and I'll miss both of them. I'm talking about Brad and Abby, of course, and I'll very much miss both of them from Badlands. Brad has been one of those people that kept me going personally at a time when I was doing my show on my own, and I didn't quite know how to fly this airplane a little bit. And Brad was there to help me and make sure that things worked and all this. So I'm going to miss him in particular, and also miss seeing them, both Brad and Abby at GART. But we're going to have a great GART anyway. So let's move forward. So, and also I have an abbreviated Spellbreakers intro too that I have. Some of you may know that for a while I've been using the Route 66 theme song and just sort of playing random images. And well, there's a couple things going on. First of all, I've been wanting to make a real intro for a long time, which I've done, but I've got a little over, it's 2 minutes of that music that I wanted to fill with the interesting images that I could just play. And I'm about halfway through it. I've got about a minute of it, but I'm using a short intro right now, and I hope to use a longer one, but there's a bunch of complications now. Not all the complications this week, with all the things going on in the world that we all have to think about. And so tonight I'm broadcasting on YouTube streaming to YouTube for the first time. So if you're over there in YouTube, hello, I hope you can hear me over there. I think I actually can see your chat, actually, I think. If I go over to the chat, I actually get the YouTube comments show up. Comments. Hello, everybody. Oh, look they've got people. Babbage 3, Harry Patriot, MZ Mauser. Hello, all of you. Hello. I'm Lucis et Umbri. That's me. That's me. I'm there. I jumped in the chat. I hope I remember to keep looking over at YouTube. Now, I wasn't even sure I was going to be able to do that because, well, YouTube is really strict with copyright. And so we can get a bunch of bad things can happen. I can get if the copyright algorithm detects something that's copyrighted music, say, for example, my theme song that I use, then that can get so that there's no revenue, YouTube revenue, ad revenue, I get, or whatever, how it works. I don't know quite how it works. That won't come through for the show, but also the copyright can get struck in which there's a mark against the Badlands Media channel, and if it gets too many of those, it gets demonetized and all sorts of. So I'm trying to be a good citizen. I learned that I can actually, and if you're watching YouTube, this is what I was trying to do tonight. I learned that I can delay the start of the YouTube broadcast a few minutes by starting on Rumble, where there's no copyright issues. And if you've been watching my show a while, you know that I've often played a lot of clips of movie trailers and things like that at the beginning to sort of lead into the show. And so I was going to delay YouTube and then start it after that. Well, and ChatGPT said, oh, it's easy. You can just toggle on, say, YouTube, start streaming to YouTube now. Well, the word toggle, ChatGPT, I guess, made that up because you actually have to delete. I have to delete YouTube from the stream and then re-add it. And it's about, it's always like 6 or 7 clicks to do all those kind of things. And doing that in the middle of the show, I didn't want to do that tonight. So we're just flying. We're just going full in with the Route 66 music, which is only like about 10 seconds of it that I use right now at the beginning. But that's enough. It only takes it's like name that tune. I can name that tune in one note. Well, the algorithm can name a tune in one note, and if it's an important part of the music, it also, YouTube's awful. This copyright thing is just awful. So it really makes it hard to do cultural commentary, which I think is un-American. The kind of cultural commentary I've done on a lot of the shows, I think that's a fundamental right to do. But I don't make the law. We made this. Clinton administration made that law, Digital Millennium Copyright Act. And I know the people who are content creators, some of them like it because it protects their material. Like we have one of our hosts here who is speaking out in front of it for it. I brought it up yesterday in the GART chat, and so Ghost. Was it Burning Bright? He has books that he publishes, and he's like, well, I sort of like the copyright protection in some cases. So all this is my way of I'm sort of tap dancing right now to just get used to being on the stream. I used to play those long 10-minute videos I made, and that would sort of give me a chance to, like, I'm on stage and I'm standing behind the curtain and I'm like, okay, all right, get ready to go on. All right, don't have to get all boozed up, pills like Judy Garland, but sometimes you understand why people had to do that. So because I want the show to be good and I don't want to look like an idiot, I have ego, embarrassment and all that. So, but I think we're ready to start the show. And so if you're watching on YouTube, a hearty welcome to you too. And I see my friends in the chat. Sammy the Squirrel, I am no longer able to watch as many of the shows like I used to. Scheisler says, I love the Route 66 music. Oh, and Sammy the Squirrel posted, you should really follow his blog. He does give really good updates on the what's happened in Iran over the last week, because of all the things we got going on in our personal lives, like all the stuff I just talked about. Well, we got, we all of us have over our heads the Iran thing, which is confusing. It's confusing, if nothing else, because there's all sorts of contradictory things going on. And I think part of our narrative in Badlands is that we've settled on, among our hosts, the idea that the narrative is meant to be confusing and contradictory right now. It's meant to expose those who would manipulate the narrative. And this is part of what Trump is doing. I think a lot of us have sort of settled on that point of view. But we do have some very big arguments going on in Badlands among people, and there probably will come up in GART. So if you want to see some really interesting discussions, please come to GART. I'm going to be there, and I hope you will be there too. Now, also, I'm supposedly streaming to pilled.net, but God help me, I can't figure it out. So if you're watching on Pilled, I probably can't see your comments. I tried to go just now and see the comments, but I can only deal with one innovation per week, I think. So let's get into the show. Last week we did a show. Well, first of all, last week we did a show, and was Jeffrey Epstein and Cold Fusion Part 1. And so we went over some things. I'll review a little bit of that before we get into the thick of the show. But tonight's episode of Spellbreakers is brought to you in part by our friends at the Pet Club.
Science proves that a healthy immune system is the body's first defense against the smallest of ailments to the most catastrophic. Coriolus versicolor is the most sought-after, all-natural supplement for both humans and pets to help boost the immune system. There are over 400 studies worldwide on its effectiveness in humans, including Sloan Kettering Cancer Center, MD Anderson Cancer Center, and now from the University of Pennsylvania School of Veterinary Medicine. Together, we can help reverse this terrible tide now plaguing your loved ones and give them the immune-boosting supplements that they need.
All right, and we're also sponsored tonight by River. So I think Bitcoin was at 76,600, I think, or 72,600 today. It was choppy up and down today, sort of treading water a little bit. See, my run sheet said talk about the price of Bitcoin, but we've also got River. I love the Route 66 theme music. Stack Satoshi, Sats with River, the Bitcoin-only platform built by Bitcoiners for Bitcoiners. Why River? Zero fee recurring buys, stack Bitcoin effortlessly, hourly, daily, weekly, or monthly, 3.5% Bitcoin interest on cash, FDIC insured, no minimums, withdraw anytime, expert US-based support, human help, plus private client services for big buys. That would be $100,000 plus. Business accounts, boost your balance sheet with Bitcoin and earn 3.5% paid in Bitcoin. Top tier wallet. Send, receive, and manage Bitcoin securely. Unmatched security, full reserve custody, multi-sig cold storage, and proof of reserve. Join the Bitcoin revolution at badlandsmedia.tv/river, right there up there on the screen, and earn real returns. That's badlandsmedia.tv/river. All right. Yeah, badlandsmedia.tv/river. Okay, we have a couple other sponsors. We'll get to them later in the evening, including talking about GART. I hope as many of you as possible can come to GART. So let's get into the show. So I'm going to share my screen. Share screen. Oh, we want the Chrome tab. Okay, we want a Chrome tab, and we want. Is this it? Yeah, there we go. All right. So one simplification I've been able to do so I can talk to you more and relate to you more is I've learned how to do my Keynote slides. So if you don't know, Keynote is the Apple version of PowerPoint, and I've made most of it. It's my sort of home medium that I like to use, and but it means I have to switch to the Keynote app in StreamYard, which is my streaming platform. I have to go do that and then go back to the web browser, and that's really a pain to do that kind of thing. It's so typical of StreamYard to make everything that you want to be a one-click thing into a 10-click process, and searching all over for things. But it is what it is. So we're going to get into it tonight. I want to take a look at the chat again. Take a look at see who we got in the chat. Oh, good. Yeah, Spetzel, thank you for posting the link to Sammy the Squirrel's Substack. I was hoping somebody would do that. And let's see. Yeah, Rocket Savvy. My newest Substack just published. Read it to learn about your glyco. Okay. All right. Okay. No spam though. So be careful. Be careful. We get people in here that abuse it. I don't mind if my regular listeners post links, but we get people who drop in here and they make it miserable by dropping their links to their things. Spetzel, I think Badlands could buy a YouTube licensing option. I think it's $500 a month though, not cheap. Would that mean I could play copyrighted stuff? I don't know what that means. Eleanor 2000, hello, my friend. I haven't been in the chats of other shows as much this week. I've had so much going on. I've had to focus on that and just sort of lurk in most of the shows I watch because I just had to. All right, squish the thumbs up. Yes, please do like the show. Please do give me a like. Leslie Bayer, Scheisler, we said hello to you. Mrs. Rhea Freedom Fire, hello. Mountain Mama 1017, hello. Hello, Buck Wayne. Claire Cat 361, hello. Hello, everybody. All right, I hope I see you all here. I got so many. Let's see. EC was here. Hello. Hey, did you notice I had a piece in Badlands Daily this morning? EC was here, read it. I'm going to start doing that more often too. I sort of like that. I like that. I just sent it blind to Ash, and said, I was like, oh, I hope she takes it. I've tried to follow the instructions and it works. So experiment cleared. Eleanor 2000. Oh, you got the journal article. She got the journal article we were talking about last week, the original cold fusion article. So let's get into that. Let's talk about. So tonight, it's Jeffrey Epstein and cold fusion part 2, science and murder. Okay, so do we have enough lurid things in the title this week to get people's attention? I hope so, because I don't think I could cram any more in there at the moment. All right, so yes, please do give a thumbs up. Oh, 70,623. That was the Bitcoin price. I had this slide queued up for that ad. All right, let's begin. I want to begin with a term. We're going to learn a term before we start called pathological science. I stumbled across this term this week. I hadn't heard it before, but I stumbled across it in my research about cold fusion, and I want to share it with you. So pathological science doesn't sound good, does it? And it's not, according to the definition at least. But well, let's see. Let's look into it. Pathological science is an area of research where, quote, people are tricked into false results by subjective effects, wishful thinking, or threshold interactions. The term was coined by Irving Langmuir, Nobel Prize-winning chemist, during a 1953 colloquium at the Knowles Research Laboratory. So everybody who's in atomic, nuclear physics, or chemistry knows this guy, Langmuir. All right, Langmuir said a pathological science is an area of research that simply will not go away long after it was given up as false by the majority of the scientists in the field. He called pathological science the science of things that aren't so. So it's loaded. You can tell it's sort of a loaded term. In his 2002 book, Undead Science, Sociology and Anthropology professor Bart Simon lists it among practices that are falsely perceived or presented to be science. Quote, categories such as pseudoscience, amateur science, deviant or fraudulent science, bad science, junk science, pathological science, cargo cult science. That's a term Richard Feynman invented for when you do experiments and you minimize all the negative things about it, even in your own mind. All right. And voodoo science. Examples of pathological science include the Martian canals, N-rays, and cold fusion. You saw that coming, right? The theories and conclusions behind all of these examples are currently rejected or disregarded by the majority of science. All right, and then there's a little follow. Pathological science is defined by Langmuir as a psychological process in which a scientist, originally conforming to the scientific method, unconsciously veers from that method and begins a pathological process of wishful data interpretation. See observer expectancy effect and cognitive bias. Some characteristics of pathological science are the maximum effect that is observed is produced by a causative agent of barely detectable intensity, and the magnitude of the effect is substantially independent of the intensity of the cause. Okay, so like a really threshold interaction. Okay, the effect is of a magnitude that remains close to the limit of detectability, or multiple measurements are necessary because of low statistical significance of the results. Higgs particle. excuse me. No, I didn't say that. I didn't say the Higgs particle was an example of this. I did not say that. There are claims of great accuracy. I have said that, though, but I'm not saying it here. All right. There are claims of great accuracy. Fantastic theories contrary to the experience are suggested. fantastic theories contrary to experience are suggested. Criticisms are met by ad hoc excuses. The ratio of supporters to critics rises and then falls gradually to oblivion. Langmuir never intended the term to be rigorously defined. It was simply the title of the talk, or some examples of weird science. As with attempts to define the scientific endeavor, examples and counterexamples are always to be found. All right, so maybe you can see, that I haven't heard this term, but maybe you can see that it's one you could apply to a lot of things you might hear about. But also, one man's pathological science is another man's hard, real science. Maybe we get into that issue, right? But I just want you to know this term. I think it's a good term to know, and we'll keep it in mind because supposedly cold fusion is an example of this. And as we saw last week. So last week, we started the whole thing with talking about the release of the Epstein files. And unexpectedly, amidst all the other things in the Epstein files, there was an email from Epstein to a guy named Al Seckel, who is not his brother-in-law, but Al Seckel was married to Ghislaine Maxwell's sister, Isabel Maxwell, both daughters of Robert Maxwell. And so they know each other. And it was a very interesting email, just one line from Epstein to Al Seckel. Regarding cold fusion, I killed Pons years ago. So Pons referring to Stanley Pons, one of the two scientists working at the University of Utah in 1989, who claimed to have discovered what we now call cold fusion, which was billed as a revolutionary possible energy source. So we're getting into the realm, a broader realm, I think that we might continue after this show, talking about innovative, different, speculative energy sources, because energy's where it's at, isn't it? It's everywhere you turn lately. There's something having to do with energy. Even like G Money and the Bitcoin maximalist. Well, Bitcoin's all about energy. It's like, okay, all right. There we go again, energy. So do we have a revolutionary new source of energy for humanity? Yes or no? If so, has it been suppressed? Has it been suppressed to the point of murder? Well, not in this case, at least, because Pons was not murdered. He's still alive, actually. So Epstein, as we said, wasn't specifically talking about having Stanley Pons murdered, but we're going to see there are some murders we're going to get to some murders in this show. So if you're a unsolved or maybe partially solved murder mystery fan, this show's for you. Okay. Now, Al Seckel, his friend and sort of part of the extended Maxwell family, was married to Isabel Maxwell, died himself under mysterious circumstances in 2015, was a self-proclaimed, sort of not fully educated, but self-proclaimed science advocate and skeptic. So we know the type, and these kind of people, they tend to be, it's not like they don't serve a useful purpose, but they can be really obnoxious, these people, because they claim, I'm speaking for science. It's like, oh God, not one of those, So, because it's like they learn the mainstream interpretation, and it's like anybody who doesn't conform to that, they're going to go to war against. It's like, you know what? It can be a little bit more nuanced than that guy, but he's of that ilk. And then we talked about the whole extended Maxwell thing. So you see Jeffrey and Al Seckel there, and the two Maxwell sisters, and the physicists from below Epstein that went to conference with him at Epstein Island, Little St. James Island, that is, including a couple guys at MIT, an institution that we'll get to tonight. And we learned how through Robert Maxwell, through his former business partner in scientific publishing, they quite a sway in scientific publishing for a number of years, including his partner, Paul Rosbaud, an Austrian, was influential in getting the nuclear fission results of the German lab in 1939 published to the world, which set in motion the chain of events that led to the Manhattan Project. So we're putting Epstein in there and putting an arrow over there to Stanley Pons and Fleischman, who were not murdered, but were introduced the idea of cold fusion to the world in 1989. We're going to learn some more about that tonight. So, okay, where's my cursor? Where's my cursor? Oh God, I'm starting to really dislike this thing. Okay, there it is. My black cursor disappears, and it's like, where is it? So, all right. So here's the paper. This is one Eleanor 2000 got a hold of because it's behind a paywall. Electrochemically induced nuclear fusion of deuterium. So let's go back to. So thank you, Eleanor. I would like to get a hold of a copy of that. We'd go back to 1989, so 37 years ago this month. And this is when cold fusion was sort of dropped onto the world as a thing that might revolutionize energy production. It might revolutionize humanity. And what it was, well, we'll get to that in a moment. We went through that last week, but there was a paper, and then there was a press conference on March 23rd, 1989, where Fleischmann and Pons introduced the idea and said, we've discovered this revolutionary energy process. And that was in Salt Lake City at the University of Utah. And my cursor's disappeared again. All right, there it goes. And so fusion, we covered this last week. We went over what is fusion, and that there's fission, which is the breaking apart, which is what uranium does. And then you can power a nuclear reactor with that. Because what you get out of that when you split uranium apart is that the pieces fly apart, and that's essentially the same as heating up something. And you heat up water, and it turns a turbine just like any other time you heat up water, and you can generate power with that. And if you have a very intense concentration of uranium, you can even have an explosive reaction, a bomb. And but fusion's a different process. It's fusing together, and it doesn't take big elements like uranium. You do it with small things like hydrogen, and you push them together. And there's a couple, according to our current models, evidence, theory, we've got a couple ways that fusion can happen. One is that we think it's, well, the current model of how the sun and all stars burn is through fusion. By the hydrogen in there, it's so hot and under such pressure, such high temperatures and pressure, that the hydrogen can overcome the natural repulsion it would have at room temperature. You couldn't force hydrogen together; it would fly apart because they both have the same charge. So you can't make them come together. But under high enough temperature and pressure, in what's called a plasma, where the electrons are stripped out, we think this is how the sun works and all stars work to do this, and that the discovery of this then led to speculation after the development of the uranium bomb, which is fission. Says, wait, can we use fusion in a bomb? That could release way more energy. And the answer, history says the answer is yes. Now, some of you may not believe there were fusion bombs. It's okay with me if you think that. I don't care. But after 1952, the H bomb, which was our thermonuclear weapons, uses fission to release extremely large bombs that are of much greater magnitude than Hiroshima. And we entered then the thermonuclear age since 1952. So those, that's sort of standard theory. And then there was like, well, can we do fusion in a lab? And well, we've tried since 1969 special kind of reactors called tokamaks, which are donut shaped. And yes, we can make fusion happen in a lab. But the problem is there's a net energy loss. We don't get energy out as much as we put in. We lose energy, and that's not good for power production. That's, it's like trying to make money and you lose money on every transaction. Well, now I guess in the modern age you can do that because you're trying to pump up a stock price, I guess. But according to conventional economics, you want to have profit, not loss, or else you're going to go out of business. So that's sort of an analogy between energy and money is always a good analogy, by the way. We'll get into that next week when we talk more about what energy is in its various forms. But for right now, that's the problem. And it's been considered an engineering problem as much as a physics problem for the last number of decades. Now, there have been engineering breakthroughs lately in the last couple of years. There was one at the University of Texas, my institution, with some of the people upstairs from where I worked at. I don't know quite what it is. I haven't looked into it, but I might by next week just because I'm curious. And then there's this fourth thing. But so again, conventional plasma fusion reactors require enormous temperatures and pressures duplicating that would be in the interior of the sun. But what if we could just do it in a lab in normal conditions, normal temperature and pressure? Well, that would change everything, wouldn't it? And that's what Fleischmann and Pons claimed to have discovered in 1989 and announced via press conference, which that itself sort of got them off to a bad start by doing it that way. And we'll see why they did that, because it goes to a broader story of what we're going on here. But it's disputed. This is not accepted by science that we can do this, by the scientific community, I should say. When I say by science, I mean by the scientific community as a whole. All right. So has it been debunked? Maybe. I hate the word debunked, by the way. It's a terrible word because it's used as a shorthand for way too much. So they claim they did this, that it's an ordinary chemical. It's a reaction. I should have put there, misspelled it. Reaction. So it starts out just using ordinary chemistry in a lab at room temperature, and it has a net energy gain. Could be a cheap power source if that's true. Readily available fuel, just using ordinary hydrogen. We don't have to use fancy fuel like uranium. But okay, so that sounds great. Well, it would be if it's true, but is it true? Okay. Can we? Oh, I can go up and down by arrows. Thank God. Okay. All right. So the press conference, yeah, that was March 1989. They had also submitted that paper, which is okay, and they were going to submit another paper. Now, there was another guy working at the same time. It's going to factor into our story. I'm just going to put his name out there. His name was Steve Jones, and he was a professor at BYU, also in Utah, at the same time. And he was working on, and this is, I want to get into this a little bit at least tonight and have a chance to explore it, which was that the cold fusion that Pons and Fleischmann claimed they had discovered was one of a couple types of possible cold fusion. It wasn't the only one. And Steve Jones was working on a different kind called muon catalyzed cold fusion. In fact, he invented the term cold fusion for what he was working on at his lab. And so, of course, Jones and Pons and Fleischmann knew about each other. They were just down the road from each other in the Utah Valley. And to say that they were rivals, well, they would become rivals in part because of the way the clumsy situation played out. But Jones is going to figure out into our story, and he's an interesting cat, this kid, Steve Jones. We'll talk about him a little bit. So let's just go through a timeline here. And this is a good timeline. It illustrates a lot about how science sort of works in a sloppy way. Because here's the thing, science is, if somebody tells you that science is a process of discovery, and it uses hypothesis and this, and it's got scientific method, and we discover the secrets of nature. Yes, that's all true, but really, science is a social phenomenon. Science is the sharing of information with other people. That's what we mean by science. When we say science says this, we mean the people with whom the scientific results of experiment and theory have been shared and have a discussion about it. The discussion and the sharing is the core of science. It's not just something added onto it. It is the core of science. And, you can think even back in ancient times with the ancient Greeks, that there might have been a lot, people speculate, did the ancient Greeks discover this and that? Maybe the Romans discovered how to use a steam engine and all that. Well, maybe there was a lot of stuff discovered in antiquity. But did they have science? Well, that's debatable. Were there any real scientists as we would know them? People might have discovered things, but could they share them with the world and with other people? That sharing, publishing results and sharing. That's how you know you have science in a culture, is when you have that. Not just one-off inventors coming up with things, discovering things, deriving things through theory and mathematics, but sharing it with the world that creates a civilizational discussion. That's what science is. And so there's at least one true scientist in the ancient world that I think everybody would agree on, and that's Archimedes, who performed experiments, did mathematical theory calculations, and published them with the world. Now, publishing back then, not an easy process, right? Papyri, copying the same things, not, until the invention of the printing press, science was slow. The printing press allowed an acceleration of science because it allowed an acceleration of publication of things to the world. All right, so 1988, Pons and Fleischmann come up with this idea that maybe they can create this thing called cold fusion. And they begin doing experiments about it. They might have been doing it earlier than 1988, but in 1988, they begin to think they have something. They apply for a grant for experiments. The grant proposal, the person who judges their grant, by the way, one of them is Steve Jones at BYU. That's one of the reasons he pops up in this story again. But it's going to get a little bit thicker then. So by March of 1989, Pons and Fleischmann and Jones, Pons and Fleischmann think they've discovered the process of cold fusion. Jones thinks he's discovered something also that's like cold fusion, but it's a different process that I mentioned, but also happens at room temperature. And they agree to submit a joint paper to Nature. Nature being like the New York Times of, it's sort of a bad analogy, of science. It's really the grand central location for all of the branches of science, where you have the stage, the biggest stage to all the scientific community. And it's a rigorous, peer-reviewed publication. Let's just accept that term for now, peer-reviewed. That's part of this publication process that is the core of science. And they agreed to do that. But then Pons and Fleischmann, they were really sort of clumsy. They sort of got pushed, I don't know, was it themselves or the University of Utah, and they were concerned about priority and patents for this. So they pushed Pons and Fleischmann to publish their results, which they did. They submitted it to a journal, the article that Eleanor 2000 said she'd found. And on the 13th of March, but Pons and Fleischmann and Jones said, we're going to submit a journal article to Nature together, all of it, both of our teams. And that was going to be on the 24th of March. And then the day before, Pons and Fleischmann, pushed by the University of Utah, decided to jump the gun with a press conference that was then on the cover of the newspaper, Salt Lake City Tribune, on the 23rd and on the 24th, I mean. And, so they're sort of freestyling it here in a way that's sort of not the way you usually do things, and tends to create a lot of hard feelings and all this. But so great was the pressure on them, I think, that they went ahead and did this, and the world took notice right away. Like I said, I remember this time, and so we're going to go through here the timeline of cold fusion, and I could call this timeline the rise and fall of cold fusion and how it flamed out and all this. So I'm going to give you first the sort of the official version of things, that if you were to study it, this is like out of Wikipedia. And this is how cold fusion was thrown upon the world, and then it was sort of proven wrong, shown to be pathological science, and discarded. But there's more to the story than this. There's more to the story, including murder. Okay. So the world takes notice. Oh my gosh. This blows people's minds. This is the wildest claim. This is crazy that you could have fusion at room temperature from a simple chemical experiment. And it would produce, you would know it was fusion because of a couple things. It would produce too much excess heat, energy that would heat up the water that you wouldn't account for by any chemical process going on. And it would also produce artifacts of the fusion process itself, physics artifacts such as neutrons, excess neutrons, we call it neutron flux. I had worked in neutron physics leading up to this, so that, if you pay attention to these things when they cross your area of interest and experience, and excess gamma radiation, I think, and excess neutrinos, I think, if I recall correctly. So if you could find those and find excess heat, that would say, oh, we've got something here. So they thought they had found it. So a bunch of teams around the country and the world tried to duplicate this. So April 10th, a group at Texas A&M reports excess heat production. A group at Texas Tech, Georgia Tech, the same day, reports neutron production. Again, both signatures that say, oh, we've got something here. April 12th, ponds acclaimed at an 8th American Chemical Society meeting. And I would say these 3 days here, the 10th, 11th, and 12th of April, 2 weeks after the original press conference, were the brief, just golden age of cold fusion enthusiasm, where for a couple days there, the world believed that we might have a new revolutionary energy source for humanity. All right, I want to make sure I'm not missing any. Okay, we've got $100 from, do we? Yes. I wish I had some kind of bell or something. $100. The Boom Diggity. Love your shows, Matt. Would love your thoughts on thorium and how that is similar or different than fusion. I am a science retard, so sorry if the question is extremely elementary. It is not extremely elementary. It's a great idea. I will do a show on that. I think I'm going to do a bunch of shows now. About energy for a while, because we're wartime now, are we not? And so I want to contribute to the war effort. Did a lot of shows about cultural history and how great America is. Going to bear down. I didn't do a bunch of shows about science for a while. I had to learn how to talk about science online on these kind of shows without sounding just like a physics professor, because I love teaching classroom physics. I loved doing that, both college level and also on a high school level to some degree, but high school students are crazy. So, that was a little bit tougher. And also the curriculum, I had to follow a curriculum from the school and stuff. But in the college classroom, I had such a great time doing that. But college, the way you teach about physics in a college lecture doesn't really translate over to this kind of format. I can't count on people, in a classroom, I can say, oh, you got to show up every week. And I can count on people having seen previous episodes. We all got lives. We drop in and out. Maybe you miss a show or something like this. But I know you guys never miss a show, but that's the way it works. That's the reality of the real world, right? And also, the using slides and things, that just doesn't cut it. I have to use a chalkboard. Using a chalkboard, I'll talk about that sometime. Why chalkboards is the arena where physics really happens. So not just in the classroom, but when physicists do their work, they use chalkboards. And without a chalkboard, it's like, ugh, it doesn't feel like I'm doing anything. I feel really hamstrung. But I think in the last couple of years, I think I've gotten comfortable enough with you guys, and you guys have made me feel good enough that I have confidence now to dive back into these scientific subjects in a way that I think works online in a Badland context. So thank you, the Boom Diggity. Thank you so much. I wish I had one of a clip. I got to make a clip to play when people give money, so that it's fun. We like to do that. It's fun, right? So I would do maybe like Spock saying, "Pure energy, pure thought," like that. Maybe I'll use that. So I sort of did it on the fly right there. All right. So we have Texas A&M, sister institution to where I was about to go, University of Texas, and Georgia Tech. Say we've got it, and then Pons is acclaimed American Chemical Society meeting. They're like, the great Pons has given us an energy source like Prometheus. American Chemical Society, by the way, their building in Washington D.C. is named for a guy I worked for, and that my dad worked for years and years. A guy named Clifford Hach, H-A-C-H. He was a great chemist, industrial chemist, and my dad worked for him in Iowa and Colorado, and I even worked for him for one summer in 1988, about the time all this was starting up. Okay, just had to mention that to mention my dad and that he worked for Cliff Hach, and ACS building is named for him because the Hach family gave him lots of money. to build it. All right. April 13th, though, things begin to unravel the next day. Georgia Tech team retracts its claim about the neutron production. And a Caltech team reports they're unable to verify the claims. So now we've got, And the University of Utah, meanwhile, asks Congress to provide $25 million to pursue the research. $25 million was a big chunk of money back then. Pons and Fleischman are scheduled to meet with President Bush, George H.W. Bush, on May 6th. And so they have a congressional hearings on the 26th, though, and Stanford University is the only one that shows up in support and says, we believe Pons and Fleischman, their results. Okay. All this is happening so fast. This is lightning speed. And like I said, I remember this playing out and how excited everybody. I wasn't yet at graduate school, but you could see the excitement building up. So April 30th, 1989, the New York Times, although it declares cold fusion dead because of the negative results that are coming in and the backtracking. And so the New York Times, which of course is the authoritative source of truth in science. I'm joking, of course. It is, but the New York Times is the authoritative. The New York Times declares cold fusion dead. That sounds so weird to me that they would. And they did it in they called it the Utah Fusion Circus. They did it in an unsigned editorial. So it's like, okay, all right, New York Times, thank you for being the authoritative source on science. Just like Fox News was the authoritative source on who won the Arizona electoral votes on the November 3rd, 2020. It's that kind of thing. All right. The next day, the Boston Herald ridicules cold fusion. Then there's an American Physics Society. So the chemists had their meeting. Now the American Physics Society has a meeting in Baltimore, and they have a special session about cold fusion. There are 9 leading speakers, and 8 of them stated that they considered the initial Fleischman and Pons claim dead. Caltech researcher Koonin, who would later go on to work in the Obama administration Department of Energy and work for British Petroleum, the competence and delusion, because the incompetence and delusion of Pons and Fleischman. So really harsh words about fellow scientists, really con. And one of the CERN researchers on the panels, not Koonin, I should have changed the name there, was the first to call it pathological science. That's why I talked about that at the beginning. So, and then on the 4th, the meetings with the various representatives from Washington are canceled. I presume that means the meeting with President Bush was canceled too. All of a sudden, everybody wants to, based on all this negative stuff, all of a sudden, everybody's, this is dead, and they're running from it now. May 6th, Time magazine had I need to plug in. Had a cover that I think you can see there about fusion or illusion. Okay. So now it's, now the trend is down, just 6 weeks after this all started. And then May 8th, only Texas A&M results are still being asserted as being validating the results. And the Texas A&M team would hold on for a while. Throughout the summer and fall then of 1989, negative journal articles appear in Nature saying cold fusion doesn't work based on the results they're finding. But meanwhile, in August, the University of Utah, which had asked Congress for money, establishes the National Cold Fusion Institute with $4.5 million, so a lesser amount of money than they asked Congress for. So the NCFI, National Cold Fusion Research Institute. And then in November, the Department of Energy has a special panel report on it. It says there's no compelling evidence for cold fusion. So the trend is definitely down. And then throughout 1990, by now I'm in graduate school, and now I can take the temperature, so to speak, no pun intended, of the people around me, and and by then cold fusion really it was like, oh, well, it was a nice idea, but clearly it didn't work. There'd been a couple guys at UT who'd been dabbled with it, But really, it was our sister institution at A&M who'd really taken the lead. And by then, by 1990, fall of 1989 and into spring of 1990, it was sort of like, ooh, how embarrassing for them that they fell for this hoax. That was sort of the attitude. So in March, though, Michael Salomon, a physicist from the University of Utah, so this is at Utah now, and 9 co-authors reported negative results. University faculty were then stunned when a lawyer representing Pons and Fleischmann, Pons and Fleischmann really stirred up, they really brought a lot of stuff on themselves, demanded that the Solomon paper be retracted under threat of a lawsuit. The lawyer later apologized. Fleischmann defended the threat as a legitimate reaction to the alleged bias displayed by the cold fusion critics. So critics within the same department as Pons and Fleischmann are attacking them, and they're threatened to sue them, which is, that's just crazy when in the scientific community to think of that. In May, then, of 1990, one of the 2 A&M researchers, so now we're back to Texas A&M, Kevin Wolf, acknowledged the possibility of spiking. In other words, something bad experiment, but said that the most likely explanation was tritium contamination in the palladium electrodes, or simply contamination due to sloppy work. So basically saying, well, you know what, our results might have been bogus. So now things are really crumbling. They'd crumbled by then, but now the last little legs of support are being kicked out from under the whole process. June, article in Science by science writer Gary Taubes destroyed the public credibility of A&M tritium research when he accused its group leader, John Bocchus, and one of his graduate students of spiking the cells with tritium. In other words, just salting the results, faking it. That's just the highest level of fraud. Taubes, by the way, is the author of this book. I don't know if you can see it. This is Nobel Dreams. He actually goes against, takes apart a Nobel Prize winner at CERN. So he's that kind of journalist. He's a scientific journalist. So he attacked the Texas A&M team as for faking their results, that's serious accusation. And by the way, Science that he published that in, that's like Nature. Those are both sort of the big, all the sciences, the prestige journal. All right. September, National Cold Fusion Research Institute, so the one at Utah, lists 92 groups of researchers from 10 countries that had reported corroborating evidence of excess heat. So they say, no, there's 92 groups in 10 countries that say they found it. But they refused to provide any evidence of their own, arguing that it could endanger their patents. Again, the patent issue was a big issue in all this. By this point, however, academic consensus had moved decidedly towards labeling cold fusion as a kind of pathological science. Yeah, that's definitely, I would say, is correct from my experience or recollection. By 1990, it was so over. By fall of 1990. But again, I'm just giving you the on the surface story. Wolf finally said that the results were explained by tritium. So this is the guy at Texas A&M. So he finally said, you know what, I think it was contamination. He didn't say we faked it, but he said it was contaminated. An A&M cold fusion review panel found the tritium evidence was not convincing and that, well, they couldn't rule out spiking. So tritium is something you would expect to find if it were valid. I should have mentioned that. It's basically a form of helium, but that's not important. Contamination and measurement problems were more likely explanations, and Bocchus never got support from his faculty to resume his research. Okay, well, so now the roof is caved in. 1991, then, Pons leaves the University of Utah and goes to Europe. In June 30th, 1991, the National Cold Fusion Institute, the one at Utah, closes after it runs out of funds. So now, now it's all over but the crying. It found no excess heat, and its reports of tritium production were met with indifference. Eugene Malov, okay, here's another thing. A guy named Eugene Malov at MIT, this is a guy at MIT, a physicist at MIT, publishes Fire and Ice Defending Cold Fusion. We're going to get to him in a moment. 1990s, there's multiple books published, most of them critical of cold fusion. A few are that defend it, like Malov, the book I've just mentioned. 1992, Pons and Fleischmann resumed research in France with Toyota's IMRA lab. So they're over in France trying to do it, what they did in Utah. Fleischmann leaves for England in 1995, and the contract with Pons is not renewed. In 1998 after spending $40 million with no tangible results. So they continue churning away for a couple years, but without results they can show. 1997, Japan cuts off research and closes its own lab after spending $20 million. In 1998, University of Utah no longer conducting cold fusion research at all. The Toyota lab in France stopped cold fusion research after spending 12 million pounds. Pons makes no public declarations since then, since 1998. But Fleischmann continues giving talks and publishing papers saying, we actually found it. He keeps saying, we found this. In the 2000s, there's been multiple attempts to revive research by private research groups, including Google. We'll get to that. Okay. So let's go back to this now. Let's go back to this email here of, this is not the one I wanted. Let's see. There we go. This is the one I wanted. So let's go back now and look at this email from Jeffrey Epstein, which was 2009, where he says, I killed Pons. I killed this whole idea. I think he means to say. He's saying he stifled cold fusion research. What does that mean? Well, let's put it, there are a couple messages. There's one from Al Seckel before that, and then there's one follow-up. Part of a longer chain. I couldn't find other emails. I'd love to. But as part of the previous email, there's just been, I think, a few minutes before that, based on time zones. Al Seckel, the spokesman for Science Skeptic, et cetera, had said, as in passing, in an email about disinformation in science, he said, by the way, Jeffrey, for your amusement, I spent part of the last month investigating a new cold fusion device. So this is 2009, for our billionaire engineer pals on the West Coast who were about to sink millions of dollars into this thing. I initially sent a free letter of be careful, be very careful, etc., but got in response a long letter filled with claims on how this was going to solve the various energy problems, etc. The material was good enough to fool an educated layman, but not an expert. They hired me and I sorted out. No surprise. So he's an expert. He doesn't even have a degree. He's just a self-appointed one of those guys. Not an expert. I hired me to sort it out. No surprise. It was less efficient, not more efficient. Junk science throughout. And then that's when Epstein replies, regarding cold fusion, I killed Pons years ago. And then Seckel replies, don't leave me hanging, Jeff. I want to know your relationship to Pons and cold fusion, smiley emoji. So when I read this, I got some clarity about what they might have meant then, which is a little bit less lurid than it sounds. Which is that, to me, this sounds like Al Seckel being his sort of skeptic, like, I'm an expert, and these guys at Google were going to spend this money, and I told them not to because I'm the expert. And then Epstein comes back, and he's basically dunking on Seckel here, maybe saying, "Hey, I killed Pons years ago. Like, you think you have any sway? Well, let me tell you." So he's sort of jacking it up on Seckel, maybe. And then, and Seckel's clearly the guy who wants to write more to Epstein than Epstein's willing to write back. And he's like, "Oh, tell me, Jeff, tell me." So it sounds like that. It sounds like, Seckel's trying to brag about how he's this great scientific expert and he's defending against the falsity of cold fusion. And Epstein apparently is like saying, "Hey, you're talking to the OG cold fusion debunker here. So come on." That's one interpretation. But it's sort of vague, isn't it? Maybe it means something else. So, okay. Later, on the 14th of that same year, Seckel writes to Epstein about we're evaluating the cold fusion device for Google. It's probably the same thing as the other email. I'm saving their asses from investing millions in the junk science. Lately, there's been an outbreak of energy devices promising clean, renewable energy, but they are crackpot. And they look different. They look scientific, have enough scientific and technical jargon to fool the educated layperson, but not the expert. At least I am getting paid doing this type of physics. So, okay, whatever, dude. All right. Maybe that's all there is to it. Maybe that's all, but maybe not. All right. So where are we at? 7:04. Okay. So we got a little bit more time. So I want to, well, first of all, let's say tonight's episode of Spellbreakers is brought to you in part by, who's our next sponsor? What is it? Oh yeah. It's, our next sponsor is, Soft Disclosure.
Get you some of that beard oil.
Now that I'm alone at the close-up, do you see how awesome my beard looks right now?
I use the beard oil every single day. First thing. Comes out feeling all silky smooth. I take the dropper and I manually apply the oil directly to my mustache. Nice and, oh man, I love it. And then I do drops all throughout the hair, and then I just rub it all in. And then I top it off with the tallow stick on the face.
But I feel like I have to grow a beard just to try this beard oil. It sounds
Do it, Jay.
amazing.
It's all from softdisclosure.com, and the best part about it is you will be supporting Badlands Media, Annie from Willow and Farms, and basically 3 of Annie's neighbors. So that's 5 total American companies that you'd be supporting with one purchase.
I have been using the Soft Disclosure scentless beard oil every day after the shower. It looks unkempt, but it feels silky smooth. I want to look a little wild and unapproachable, but for the woman I trust, she'll be like, oh, it's actually kind of soft. He is approachable after all. Otherwise, stay away. And Soft Disclosure will help you too with that if that's the very specific vibe you're going for.
That is very specific, yes.
You guys are supporting American businesses when you do that. It's absolutely incredible, and you get a great, great product.
And we're also sponsored by, well, of course, by GART.
Patriots, the fight for truth doesn't stop at the screen. It's hitting the road again. Badlands Media is rolling into Nashville on April 9th through 12th for the next stop on the Great American Restoration Tour. Join your favorite Badlands hosts and like-minded Americans for 3 powerful days. Packed with unfiltered discussions, deep dive panels, and real debate. Hear the raw truth, ask the tough questions. No topic too hot, no question too bold. GART is where our community comes alive. Tickets are on sale now at badlandsmedia.tv/GART, where you can also grab a virtual pass and watch from home. Join us to question narratives and fight for America's future. Nashville is calling. The restoration continues. Get your passes today. See you in Music City.
All right, and we're back. Good to see you all. 7. I noticed Spetzel said A&M is not Texas's sister school. They're our little brother. An annoying one you try to forget. Yeah, it was, once the fraternity of science sort of supersedes some of that to some degree. I know what you're talking about. I mean, I get when Texas plays A&M every year, I'm there burnt orange all the way, but when among scientists, it's not like we're sitting over here in Austin looking at A&M floundering in the cold fusion debacle, which that's what we thought at the time, at least, and going, A&M, but for the grace of God could have been Texas, right? It's not like that, because everybody knows each other. It's a small world. So among the physics department, there was a sense of, Oh, those guys, poor guys, they got suckered into this. Because I just want to stop here at this point and say this whole thing I just went through with you, that timeline, but the quick rise and flame out of cold fusion, and then the long tail of the pathetic grinding down of the last shreds of validity of it over the next years, and the sad end of the research programs and all this. Well, most of that I did not follow, the later part of that, past, say, 90, 91. The stuff in 89 and 90, I did follow. It was just part of the news. You sort of did follow it, and it was part of being, especially in graduate school, when you're talking to everybody and you're big-eyed and you're trying to find your way to your own research and all this. All that stuff is stuff I sort of knew about and followed at the time, and I can tell you that sort of captures the essence of what it was like. But that's only maybe part of the story. It's only part of the story. There's more to the story. And this is what I learned about. First of all, I'm going to go through a bunch of slides really quickly here. Now we're going to get into some weeds, but we're going to go through the weeds quickly. Not into the weeds. We're going to get into some tall grass, because the thing is, the way I heard it at the time, and the main way most people thought of it at the time, was that cold fusion is something that just sort of came out of nowhere. It came out of nowhere, that Fleischmann and Pons came up with this unprecedented, crazy idea in this crazy lab experiment that there could be fusion at room temperature that could produce energy. That's the way I understood it at the time. But that's not true at all. It turns out there was a whole history going back 100 years about this idea. So I was going to go through this quickly so you can get a sense of context. Now, you don't have to follow this closely. I'm just going to go through it just to give you a frame of reference that Fleischmann and Pons didn't come out of nowhere. This was an idea people had kicked around. So where are we? Can we go back to our slides, please? Here we go. Back in 1866, is when a guy named Thomas Graham discovered that palladium, the metal that Fleischmann and Pons used, could absorb hydrogen in this way. That's a key part of the cold fusion thing. Well, this had been known since 1866. All right. Next slide. And then in 1926, so 100 years ago this year, listen to this. Fritz Paneth and Kurt Peters, Germans, publish a article in Naturwissenschaften, which was part of Springer Verlag, which would become owned by the Maxwells, and would all that. We went through that last week. They publish an article, and we'll just coincidence at this point because this is before all that. They reported the transformation of hydrogen into helium by nuclear catalysis when hydrogen was absorbed by finely divided palladium at room temperature. Wait a minute, that's what Fleischmann and Pons were doing. However, the authors later retracted that report, saying that the helium they measured was due to background from the air. That's interesting though, isn't it? That he did the same thing and thought he found something? I think that's really interesting. And then in 1927, there was a Swedish guy who thought he found pretty much the same thing, John Tandberg. Very similar to, he used heavy water, which is a form of water with deuterium in it, as I mentioned last week. This is almost exactly what Fleischmann and Pons were doing. Now, but there's no evidence Fleischmann and Pons knew about this stuff. But it's interesting, this is an idea that's been around a while, isn't it? This is another big clue, I think. And then we have something called muon catalyzed fusion. So this is another form of room temperature fusion. And this is accepted by the scientific community. This was hypothesized and later discovered late 40s, throughout the 50s, up to 1957. So muons, those are heavy electrons. That's all you need to think about it for right now. And this actually does give you fusion at room temperature. But the problem is and it might be a power source. This is what Steve Jones at BYU would be working on, by the way. This is real. So why don't we use it? What's the deal? The problem is muons are not something you can buy off the shelf. You have to make them. They live for a couple microseconds, which is actually long in the scale of nuclear reactions, and it would be plenty of time to do a cascading fusion reaction. It sounds short, but it's not. But the problem is, to create muons is a lot of work, and it takes more energy to create these muons and to supply them than you would get back out there. So that's the part that's the problem. And that's pretty much considered an unsurmountable barrier since 1957 by a guy named J.D. Jackson. At the time when cold fusion was playing out, I was taking a course where the textbook was written by J.D. Jackson. Where's my copy of Jackson? Jackson's Classical Electrodynamics. If you're a physicist and you went through graduate school at any time recently, you use this book. I used it so much the cover came off of my copy of J.D. Jackson's of Classical Electrodynamics. He does not discuss muon catalyzed fusion in there, but it's real, but it just is not practical. So Fleischmann and Pons supposedly found a different way to make it. But Steve Jones, that's what he was working on, was this alternate thing. He coined the term cold fusion. Again, it would be nice if it could be done, but it's not practical at all. Now, I wanted to mention Steve Jones. One thing about him, you may have heard of this guy. He is one of the guys that promoted early on the idea that the Twin Towers were destroyed by nanothermite. Yes, believe it or not, that's Steve Jones, same Stephen E. Jones. So there's that. Just thought I'd throw that in. This is weird. This subject is just a rabbit hole of this is so weird. Okay, but again, there's the cold fusion research goes on. There have been attempts to revive it. We're not going to be able to talk about them tonight, but we'll get to those next week as we move forward. By next week, we're going to talk about more like we want to get to the idea, is this real after all? And can it be found? What's going on? What's the state of the current research? We're going to do that next week. But for now, we just have to finish up with some lurid things. All right, so 2026, there's still people trying to do muon catalyzed fusion and make it practical. There's a lab that specializes in this. All right, there's people doing that, trying that. There's attempts here's National Geographic, cold fusion remains elusive, but these scientists may revive the quest. This was 2019. All right, more articles. It's attempts to do this, so we're going to get into that. But mainly, this is the 1989 New York Times saying, "Fusion in a jar, recklessness and brilliance." That's still where science officially is at. But now let's get to this. Eugene Malov. We'll get to this. We got to get to this at least tonight. So I didn't even know about this guy, but I read a tweet about him, an X post about him just a couple days ago that had popped up. So Gene Franklin Malov, aerospace engineer from MIT, PhD in environmental engineering from Harvard. In 1989, the chemistry doctors Fleischmann and Stanley Pons announced that they had achieved cold fusion. Months later, MIT stated the experiment was erroneous. Okay. But Malov's at MIT, and he says, not so fast. In Malov, who was the editor-in-chief of MIT Technology Review magazine, resigned from his position, denouncing the data had been manipulated against Fleischmann and Pons, and that the Fleischmann-Pons experiment was correct. So a voice of dissent saying there's fraud going on. He founded a scientific magazine, Infinite Energy, dedicated to exploring alternative energy sources. So, by the way, please give a thumbs up if you're liking the show. Please do give a thumbs up. We really like that, a like. And like I said, in 1991, he published one of the most definitive early books on cold fusion called Fire and Ice, which I've since bought. All right, but his story unfortunately has a twist. So here's Infinite Energy. This was a website he curated for a while. So this guy with a lot of chops. July 2004, scientists' violent death shocks cold fusion research network. So basically, in May 2004, he was brutally murdered. Eugene Malov. Eugene Malov, one of cold fusion's most ardent advocates, was overjoyed in April when the U.S. Department of Energy agreed to give the scorned subject another review. To him, it was a breakthrough. Years of work trying to get mainstream science to pay attention to cold fusion seemed to be paying off. But a month later, oh, I got a rumble rant. Reberhart 29, $10. Thank you, Matt. You're just way too smart for this general science biology BS mindset. I can follow and understanding is limited, but you're good at explaining it. Yeah, so long as you can follow at the time, then I feel like I've done my job, because it takes me a while to absorb all this. This is, you got to let it sink in. So hopefully, even if all this is new to you and going by in a blur, believe me, it'll sink in at some point, because you'll hear it again and it'll make sense the next time. That's how it works. All right. Trust me. So this guy thought, it's real. In April, the Department of Energy was going to give it a shot. Years of work trying to get mainstream science to pay attention to cold fusion seemed to be paying off. But a month later, on May 14th, Maloff was dead, brutally murdered at his childhood home in Norwich, Connecticut. So they didn't make an arrest. It took them years to make an arrest. We'll see. So Maloff, 56, a Massachusetts MIT graduate, was chief scientist writer at MIT when the cold fusion debacle exploded in 1989. Skeptical at first, he soon became a believer and grew increasingly frustrated with the scientific establishment's refusal to re-examine cold fusion. Finally, in 1991, he quit, disgusted with what he saw as mainstream scientists' unwillingness to look seriously at cold fusion. So he wrote the book in 91. He's murdered in 2004, right when he thinks the Department of Energy is going to resume research on it. And we could read the whole thing, but that's, it's basically, it talks about him here. So 2005, a couple men are arrested, but then the case goes nowhere and they're let go. In 2008, the case is dismissed. State of Connecticut, a reward. Finally, they arrest some other people in 2011. There's charges filed in 2012. In 2016, someone's finally convicted of it. And 41-year-old Moselle Brown, so years later, they convict somebody for this murder, saying basically, he was angry because his parents were being thrown out. They were living in the house where Maloff's parents owned. And Maloff was there to clean it out. And this guy came and murdered him. That's the official story, at least. There was a plea bargain, etc. So it's like, case closed, I guess, right? Case closed, I guess. But and then there's that. And then there's, of course, we had just 3 months ago, MIT professor and fusion scientist shot dead at his home. So this was the case of that Portuguese scientist, Nuno Loureiro, who was killed in his house. Another fusion researcher, not a cold fusion guy per se, but a fusion researcher. And this was, eventually they think it was the guy, remember the Brown University thing, where that guy barged into the lab and killed somebody, and he was not on camera, and it was all confusing. How could they not be on camera? And then they later tracked him down, and they said, then he went and shot this fusion researcher at MIT. And they pinned it on him, and he committed suicide at a storage unit in New Hampshire. So, okay. In New York Times, big long article about him. He basically he went to Brown in 2000, 2001, and then basically dropped out of contact with society. And then he pops back up again 25 years later in this murder. It's like, what the heck? And he was Portuguese, so there's that connection with the Portuguese researcher at MIT. Do we buy all this? Is this something making sense? This is sounding really weird, right? And that's only one of a bunch of weird, like maybe 6 or 7 strange murders of people connected to defense research of scientists. There was the guy at Caltech, too, killed at his home. All of them supposedly, it was an intruder, etc. But it sounds sort of weird, doesn't it? All right. So we have Epstein. I killed Pons years ago. Pons was not murdered, but we did have a couple fusion researchers were murdered. Maloff in 2004 and Loureiro just in December of 2005. And, and there's one more little twist, too. one more twist, and then we're going to call it a night and pick up again next week. Well, we're going to try to figure out if they're, we're going to dive deeper into this. So I got a hold of Malov's book, Fire and Ice. I have it on Kindle. I started reading it. I might read part of it next week. It's really good because he sort of says, this is real. Not Israel, but this is real. And he writes well. And I'm going to try to read it, Fire and Ice, and read it for next week. So I'm not like General Quast where I give homework, but if you want to read along, there's that. Okay. So right before Malov was murdered, he wrote his open letter to the world. So Richard Hoagland received Gene Malov's open letter to the world less than 24 hours before Dr. Malov was brutally murdered in May 14th, 2004. He sets a goal. So I read it over. There's nothing too shocking in it. And by the way, that's wrong. There's one of the editors says, no, he didn't write it the day before this letter. It was written about a couple months before. But it's an interesting, it basically lays out, so there's his book, Fire and Ice. We'll get into that. So we're pivoting to more general energy topics, some of these other things. But he talks about some of the things. He mentions 0-point energy, if some of you heard of that. And we're going to branch out and explore some of these things. Because everything's about energy right now, isn't it? Universal Appeal for Support by Dr. Gene F. Malov, President, New Energy Foundation, Incorporated, Editor-in-Chief, Infinite Energy Magazine. To all the people of the world. Okay, so it's an open letter. I posted the link to his open letter in the Rumble chat because it's from the Wayback Machine, and I didn't even know about it. I never heard of this, but I found it. So maybe it's all just a coincidence. Maybe he was murdered by somebody who had a grudge, a beef against his parents, and all this. Maybe it has nothing to do with anything. Maybe cold fusion is junk science. Maybe it's pathological science. But there's something. There feels like there's something weird going on, doesn't it? Okay. So Spellbreakers. So we're gonna wrap up here with 7:25, and I'm gonna jump over to only lands, not only fans, only lands here in a minute. We'll do a raid. But I just wanted to say, let's see. Oh, you know what? I haven't been paying to the YouTube chat. Can I do that? Anybody been just check for? Okay, for that. Okay, comments in YouTube. All right. Hello. Okay. Hello, people in YouTube. Give the show a like. Yeah, please do give the show a like in YouTube too. All right. Thank you. If you're in Pilled, I can't see what's going on over in Pilled. Okay. All right. So yeah, and as promised, this will probably break the copyright thing, but I'm going to do it anyway. We're going to do it live. Yeah. I won't swear. But yeah, we're going to do it live.
I'm so glad we had this time together, just to have a laugh or sing a song.
Okay, Carol, maybe we'll do longer next time, but we're trying to sneak by copyright rights now. That'll probably get a copyright hit right there. But hey, this is an experiment. It's all an experiment. So I'm going to send you over to Only Lands. I'm just going to check the chat one more time here on Rumble. Thank you all for coming tonight. Thank you all. Thank you, Sammy, for your excess heat. Boom Diggity posted a link. Going to check that out. Definitely. Carol, yes, Carol's back. Eleanor 2000, thank you. Only Lands, thank you, Spetzel, for the link as usual. We're going to jump over there. Thank you all. EC was here. I suggest excess heat. Alas, it's out of print. Okay, I'll check that out too. Yeah. Tesla, John Trump, and Barron Trump should be the number one research item now. Do not underestimate the existence and information that he has, Buck Wayne. Okay. There's a lot of stuff that I have not looked into. There's a lot of stuff that you guys probably know more about it than I do. But I'm going to try to be the guy, use my training that I got years ago to bring to bear on it to make some judgments about it. So, all right. The boom diggity. The guy looks like a black version of him. I see what you mean. I don't think too hard when I'm listening. I actually grasp it better. Big picture versus tiny details. I appreciate you, Matt, says Katie Rose 23. Thank you. That's the way I like to teach. I like to teach in a way. Well, I just teach. I liked to teach. I don't teach in the classroom anymore. But when I did, I liked to. All my students were not physics majors. All my students at the University of Texas were. It was for they were non-science majors, and they were taking my class as their science requirement. So they were usually either freshmen or they were in their last semester before they graduated, and they put it off. And I loved the idea. I loved where I could get my students to be surprised at how much they understood. I hate it. I never wanted to get up there and just flap my gums and say, this is what physics is. Aren't you impressed by this knowledge? And then the people walk out going, you know what? I'm just as confused as I was when I walked in. I never wanted that to happen. I always wanted to make people feel like they had learned more than they thought they could. It's taken me a while to get back to that here on streaming, because it's a different medium altogether. But tonight, you guys have made me feel like I'm a little bit back to that. And I really appreciate you. I thank you for all that. Okay, now let's go over and raid. Let's go over and raid Only Land. So we're going to pop over there. Let me think. Do I need to do anything else? I'm going to play the outro, the Badlands outro. And then when it's over, we'll hop over there. So I'll see you guys all next week. We'll continue on with this subject. And we're going to set up, in some ways, we're going to do some stuff so that people get really, we can talk about a lot of the alternative energy things going on, because it's really exciting. We want the closing thing. Where is it? Here we go.
Thank you so much for joining us, and don't forget to hit the thumbs up on this video. And a special thank you to all of our advertising partners. Please remember to shift your dollars to support those businesses that support Badlands Media.
Okay, I can't raid. I'm getting an error trying to do the raid for some reason. And the URL is correct. So hop on over to OnlyLands. I'll publish it right here through it again, and I'll see you over there if you'd like. So bye-bye.